The United States and the West continue maintaining the strategy of being extremely cautious and slow in their aid to Ukraine. Enough for Ukraine to continue defending, but not nearly enough to attempt something bigger on the battlefield, all in the name of avoiding escalation. However, escalation still came, although it was not from an expected source. North Korea has reportedly sent its troops to fight against the Ukrainian army. Has anyone had any major reaction to this development? Let's find out about this and other important updates from the war in Ukraine in this video. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. On the battlefield, the negative trend for the Ukrainian army persists. The Russians keep pushing in several sectors. In some they advance, in others they are stopped. But overall, the Russian army maintains their offensive momentum. In early October, the 72nd Brigade, fighting in Vuhledar, was forced to withdraw in order to avoid encirclement. This unit has fought heavy battles throughout the war, including defeating several previous Russian attempts on Vuhledar. However, according to the soldiers of the 72nd Brigade, by now they are completely exhausted, undermanned, and lacking enough firepower and drones to stop the Russians. And evidently, Ukrainian defenses beyond Vuhledar are not too solid. On October 26th, the Russians made a rapid advance to Shatazka, Novokrenka, and Bohoyavlenka. Questions are being asked about the lack of proper fortifications in this area, and in the absence of those, flat terrain allowed for quick Russian progress. The Ukrainian situation here looks very threatening, as the only natural barrier to the north is the Sukhuyali River. Elsewhere, on the Zaporizhia front, the Russian 336th Naval Infantry Brigade and other units captured Levadna and made gains south of Novodorivka after conducting a localized assault on October 12th. The Russian assaults continued in the Pokrovsk sector as well. Although the Russian progress here has been steady, it has by no means been a walk in the park. According to open-source analysts, they have lost at least 539 tanks, 1,020 infantry fighting vehicles, and dozens of other types of equipment, including artillery guns, in the battles in the Pokrovsk rayon. However, even such heavy losses have not stopped the Russian advance, since they feel like they can afford these losses. The Russian movement suggests that they intend to attack Pokrovsk from the H32 highway in the northeast of the city and the M30 highway in the south. They have advanced in both directions. On the northern axis, they have completed the capture of Radivka, Krasny Yar, Kruty Yar, and Mykolaiivka, reaching the doorstep of Minaret, which is the last major settlement on the way to Pokrovsk in the east. Along the M30, Russian progress has been more impressive. On October 27th, after a few days of urban battles, Svelidova fell, and Vishneva was captured soon after. Further to the south, closer to Kurykova, the Russians have occupied Sukharina, Ismailivka, Hernik, Oleksandropil, and Maximilianivka. It is notable that, according to open-source analysts, the Ukrainians have already started building defensive lines beyond Pokrovsk in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Ukrainian engineers should have sufficient time to complete solid defensive lines, since the Russians have not reached Pokrovsk yet, and urban battles in this town will definitely delay the Russian army. But one of the biggest criticisms of the Ukrainian command is poorly constructed fortifications and the haphazard state of these defensive lines. In any case, we are approaching the Battle of Pokrovsk if the Ukrainians do not suddenly find a way to stop the Russians in this sector. After months of heavy battles, the Russians finally made notable progress in Chasiv Yar. After capturing hills west of Kalinivka, they managed to break through into the town limits through the forest, capturing the Druzhba children camp. Subsequently, they also captured the Novi district and made progress in the Zhovtnevi district, finally managing to cross the Seversky Donets Canal. The Ukrainians are still apparently holding the higher ground inside Chasiv Yar, but their situation deteriorated in the second half of October. East of the Oskil River, the Russian advance continued too. By October 5th, their forces reached the highway between Krylyakivka and Kolesnikivka. By doing this, they have essentially cut the Ukrainian forces in half at the bridgehead east of Oskil. Then they captured Stelmakivka. On October 18th, the Russian army captured Novosadova and defeated the Ukrainian bridgehead east of the river Zherebets. The Russians are already on the doorstep of Kupiansk, and if the trend of the past couple of months continues, they will most likely capture the Ukrainian bridgehead east of the Oskil fairly soon too. But Ukraine's situation has improved in Toretsk. Until mid-October, the Russians were gradually grinding their way through, but then Ukraine suddenly launched a surprise counterattack, taking the majority of Toretsk back under their control and pushing the Russians to the outskirts. This does not mean that Ukraine has won this battle, but once again it shows that despite the Russian strategic initiative on the battlefield, the Ukrainian army is still capable of doing damage. The Russians will likely bring in more reserves to overpower the Ukrainian defenses in Toretsk. The Kursk front remains the most curious battlefield of this war in terms of maneuver warfare. The situation is still fluid, with defenses not as solid and positions not as entrenched. On October 11th, the Russian 155th Naval Infantry Brigade attempted another counterattack from Kornevo. Ukraine's western flank in Kursk was taken by surprise and initially overwhelmed, allowing the Russians to advance 10 kilometers deep and retake Snagost, Lyubimovka, Zeleny Shelek, Leonidovo, and Novoivanivka. At one point, they managed to bypass the main Ukrainian defenses, enter their rear, and engage in a firefight with Ukrainian artillerists and drone operators. After recovering from the Russian assault, the Ukrainians launched their own counterattack from the north in Olgovka and Matvivka, and from the south, pushing the Russians out of Leonidovo and Novoivanivka, regaining almost half of what they had lost. Still, the Russian counterattack likely forced the Ukrainians to withdraw from their positions near Kornevo. The Russians have also made some gains east of Sudzha and have pushed the Ukrainians out of most of the Glishkovo district. Russia has already brought many reinforcements to the Kursk Oblast, and at least some of them have been previously deployed in Ukraine, according to the Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. And apparently, Russia is now planning to send North Koreans to Kursk to bolster their manpower advantage in this area further and defeat the Ukrainian army there. Initially, there were reports about North Korean instructors helping the Russian army in the use of their missiles, along with a small number of engineering forces. But at first, the South Korean news agency Yonhap reported that North Korea had sent 12,000 soldiers to fight for Russia in Ukraine. Then Zelensky and Budanov reiterated this claim, with the latter suggesting that the first 2,600 of them would be sent to the Kursk Oblast, while the rest are undergoing training in the Russian Far East. After them, the US officials and the NATO Secretary General Rutte confirmed these claims. We have not seen North Koreans fighting in this war yet, but these reports demonstrate that this development is imminent. The United States' strategy in this war has been to avoid escalation at all costs. Escalation means the increase of scope or intensity of the conflict. Involving another country's troops in the war is a textbook example of escalation. It will be curious to see how the United States and NATO react to this development. But we should not be surprised if the reaction is rhetorical only. The Pentagon's statement that the United States will place no new limits on the Ukrainian use of American weapons if North Korea indeed joins the war certainly indicates this. It does not say anything about permission to use the American long-range weapons on Russian soil. So the Western reaction to the North Korean involvement may be minimal. But the silver lining for Ukraine is that South Korea may actually consider sending weapons and ammunition to Ukraine in response to the North Korean involvement, which would be a considerable development given the military resources available to South Korea. Remember, back in 2023, it was reported that the South Korean artillery shell deliveries enabled the Ukrainians to go on a counter-offensive. For now, North Korea is the more active of the two. According to Bloomberg, since August 2023, they have sent roughly 8 million artillery shells to Russia, which constitutes a whopping 60% of what Russia has used since then. North Korea has also reportedly delivered approximately 100 Hwasong-11 ballistic missiles and Bullseye 4 anti-tank weapons. They are doing it in exchange for Russian nuclear and other military technologies. We have already reported about significant military deliveries coming from Iran and the supply of dual-use technology from China, which is used for military production in Russia. Now, according to Bloomberg, India is doing the same. In July 2024, their exports of dual-use technologies to Russia increased to $95 million. Russia has a lot of Indian rupees gained from oil sales to India, and Russia does not really have many options for spending rupees, so they use them to purchase crucial technologies from India. Meanwhile, support from the West for Ukraine is gradually decreasing. In October, the United States announced a single military aid package worth $425 million, which included NASAMS, RIM-7 missiles, Tau and Stinger missiles, HIMARS ammunition, artillery shells, and Javelin and AT-4 anti-tank guns. This comes at a time when the American media signals that the so-called Ukraine fatigue in the United States is reaching new heights. There are reports that both American parties are pressuring Zelensky to lower the mobilization age to 18. So far, the Ukrainian president has resisted these calls, as the demographic crisis in Ukraine makes it too costly to the future of the country to send the youth to the battlefield. A Ukrainian blogger explained the rationale behind this stance. People often fail to see the strategic implications. Before the war, the 18 to 25 age group numbered just over 1 million. Some have left, others were killed in action. If we mobilize what's left, we risk losing an entire generation. And if no one remains, then what's the point? With Donald Trump winning the presidential elections and the Republicans regaining the Senate majority, it is possible that the US military aid to Ukraine will significantly decrease or stop completely. Trump also promised to end the war as soon as he is elected, on day one. It is yet to happen, but we need to watch out for the change in US policy come January. The Economist quoted an American source saying, "We have no more to give them without taking serious risks in other places." The other places are the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Evidently, both are a higher priority for the United States. Ukraine reportedly asked for THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense systems, which would have helped them fight Iskander and Kinjal missiles, but the Americans have instead chosen to give them to Israel. The United States is also reportedly not impressed with Zelensky's victory plan, since it envisages a significant increase of military aid and guarantees of NATO membership. The Americans are reluctant to give either. The New York Times reported about Zelensky's proposal of a non-nuclear deterrence package, which included Tomahawk missiles with a 1,500-mile range. A senior US official called this a totally unfeasible request. You can only imagine how an administration that spent years debating the delivery of ATACMS missiles with much smaller ranges reacted to this request. Evidently, the Ukrainian government is looking for a significant weapons package to not only fight the Russians on equal footing, but to deter them from attacking Ukraine ever again. The West is not ready for such a level of support. This may prompt Ukraine to look for unconventional ways of deterring Russia from attacking it. According to media reports, during his meeting with Trump, Zelensky told the Republican nominee that Ukraine has two choices, either NATO membership or developing a nuclear weapon. He reportedly said, "Which nuclear countries have suffered? None, apart from Ukraine. Which country gave up the nuclear weapon? All of them? No, only Ukraine. And who is fighting today? Ukraine." The German Bild may not be the most trustworthy source, but they claim that a Ukrainian official told them that Ukraine is considering developing nuclear weapons. "We have materials, we have knowledge. If there is an order, we would only need a few weeks to get our first bomb." Zelensky's administration has already refuted this claim, but it is definitely something to keep an eye on, particularly if Ukraine's Western support base becomes smaller and its situation on the battlefield becomes more desperate. Let's quickly review the rest of the promised aid to Kyiv. On October 6th, the Dutch defense minister stated that Ukraine has received its first F-16s from the Netherlands, with 24 more jets to be delivered in the upcoming months. Norway will deliver 6 additional F-16s in the same time span. The French media has reported that France is going to send up to 20 Mirage 2000 5F 4th-generation fighter jets after their modernization in 2025. According to the Ukrainian Defense Minister Umerov, Britain will send additional AS-90 artillery systems to Kyiv in 2024. The German Chancellor Scholz pledged to deliver Iris-T, Gepard vehicles, howitzers, drones and artillery ammunition worth €1.4 billion by the end of the year. It looks like the Australian government has finally managed to persuade the Biden administration to send their old M1A1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. 49 tanks will be sent to Ukraine instead of disposing of them. Croatia pledged to deliver 30 M84A4 tanks and 30 BVP M80 infantry fighting vehicles to Kyiv. Lastly, on October 27th, Rheinmetall announced its intention to open another military production plant of an unspecified category in Ukraine. Kyiv has increased its domestic military production capacity drastically throughout this war. They are now reportedly producing 20 Bodena self-propelled howitzers per month. According to Zelensky, their artillery and mortar shell production in the first half of 2024 has had a 25-fold increase in comparison with the whole year of 2022. Mass drone production is taking place as well. This is quite impressive, but still not enough to supply the Ukrainian army on a sufficient level to fight off the Russians. Ukraine still heavily relies on Western military aid and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future. And since Western military support is not something Ukraine can rely on in the long run, and due to an increasingly challenging situation on the battlefield, we are hearing more and more about looming negotiations. Numerous reputable media sources, like the Financial Times and Der Spiegel, have claimed that Ukraine and its allies are considering their options right now. One of the ideas is for Ukraine to accept the loss of the occupied territories without recognizing Russia's sovereignty over them, in exchange for NATO membership or equivalent security guarantees by its allies. Given their current problems and a persistent negative trend for Ukraine, the Ukrainian government and its Western allies may see this as a reasonable conclusion. The question is, will Russia accept this, given their rhetoric about Odessa, Kharkiv, and other Ukrainian territories? That is debatable. On the one hand, Russia has occupied at least 478 square kilometers in October, its biggest gain since March 2022. On the other hand, Russia is suffering truly massive losses. According to an unspecified senior Pentagon official, Russia has suffered over 600,000 casualties since the start of the war. Previously, American sources claimed 315,000 losses suffered by the Russians by December 2023. In May 2024, the British Ministry of Defense estimated that Russia was losing 1,000 soldiers per day. That must be a worrying trend for Russia, but whether they feel like this rate of losses is sustainable is only known in the Kremlin. For now, the sides are reportedly discussing the feasibility of stopping attacks on each other's energy infrastructure, which may be a small first step towards negotiations. Finally, let's look at the visually documented losses suffered by both parties as of October 30th, brought to you by the Oryx blog. Russia has lost at least 3,513 tanks, 8,057 vehicles, 293 command posts and communication stations, 1,390 artillery systems and vehicles, 435 multiple rocket launchers, 130 aircraft, and 146 helicopters. Ukraine has lost at least 964 tanks, 3,190 vehicles, 24 command posts and communication stations, 673 artillery systems and vehicles, 79 multiple rocket launchers, 100 aircraft, and 49 helicopters. Further updates on the war in Ukraine are on the way. To make sure you don't miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member-exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.